Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to give people a few minutes to log on and we'll get started shortly. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We have a large group, so we're going to give people a minute or two to log on and then we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Navigating the Rise in Complaints, Turning Risk into Opportunity. We're recording today's session and we'll share it with you following the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom panel. Now, I'd like to hand it over to our moderator for today's session, HR Acuity's HR business partner, Courtney Mochin.
Thank you so much, Lexi, and hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be with all of you this afternoon. I'm really excited to be moderating today's session on navigating the rise in complaints, turning risk into opportunity. But before we jump into today's very timely session, I want to spend just a couple of minutes chatting about HR Acuity. So at HR Acuity, we are the leader in strategic employee relations. We have a suite of product offerings that provide comprehensive end-to-end employee relations and investigation solutions, from allegation all the way through aftercare and everything in between. We have product offerings for employees to have speak-up reporting, so for employees to anonymously report issues and concerns as they come up. We have our manager solution, which provides opportunities for managers to be able to document and respond to issues as they arise on their teams. We, of course, have our platform products, which allows our employee relations and HR professionals to effectively document and manage concerns across the organization, and for both ER investigations and case management. And then, of course, all of these product solutions are complemented by our AI and analytics, all readily available at your fingertips. So in addition to our product solutions, we also have some opportunities for you to engage with HR Acuity a couple of different ways here. So we have our annual employee relations benchmark study. This is the go-to resource for employee relations leaders, packed with valuable insights and data. The 8th edition is available now for download, with our 9th edition coming soon, so stay tuned for that. We also have our ERQ, which I can't say enough good things about our ERQ. It's our first ever employee relations maturity model, and it is designed to help employee relations leaders understand the current maturity level of your employee relations function, and based on the purpose, the processes, and influences that your team has with respect to the organization. And it really allows you as the ER leader to identify where you are, where you want to grow your function, and then be able to create actionable steps to be able to get there. So fantastic tool, highly recommend you check it out. We also have our Empower community. It is an online community for employee relations professionals. It offers networking opportunities, knowledge sharing, and collaboration. It is completely free to join, and it allows you to connect with over 6,000 like-minded professionals. It is a very rapidly growing community. If you're not already a member, please take some time and sign up. Again, it is completely free. And I think we'll probably throw a link in the chat. We do also have a mobile app available. You can download that on the App Store or Google Play. And then finally, our roundtable community consists of hundreds of global employee relations leaders. We do get together in person once a year, and also several times a year virtually. And it really is meant to help us all connect, share, and figure it out together. How do we raise the strategy level? How do we become more strategic partners in our business? This year's in-person event will be held at the end of October in Boston. Registration is now open, and we are, I think, at about 60% full. We do cap registration for this in-person event. We do like to keep it, have that intimate feel so people can really come and connect and collaborate and solution together. So don't miss your opportunity. If you are an enterprise organization with 1,000 employees or more, please consider joining us in Boston in October. Don't miss out. Hope to see you there. All right, and then we have 2 upcoming events online. So May 28th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, we are hosting a customer-only member-led discussion in Empower. It's going to be focused on what happens post-investigation, because we all know that what happens after an investigation closes is just as important as the investigation itself. So join us with 3 of our Empower members that will lead a collaborative conversation on how to strengthen your post-investigation approach. And then finally, on June 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have a session on executive investigations, so ensuring leadership accountability and workplace integrity, as we explore the unique challenges involved in investigating senior leaders. So definitely something to dive into. So we will be having a conversation around exploring navigating power dynamics, managing confidentiality, addressing internal pressures, and protecting those who come forward. So another exciting event to be able to attend. All right, and a tradition that we love to uphold here on our webinars is making a donation to an organization, a nonprofit of our speakers' choosing. And I am thrilled that Katherin chose today the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society is at the forefront of the fight to cure blood cancer and improve the quality of life for patients and their families. So thank you for that, Katherin, and you all are contributing to that by being here today. So thank you to everyone. All right, and now without further ado, I am really excited to be able to welcome our speaker for today's session, Katherin Nukk-Freeman. She is the co-founder of Shift HR Compliance Training, LLC, and as a seasoned employment law attorney, training instructor, and thought leader in the industry, Katherin brings a wealth of expertise to her partnership with clients with a focus on risk management, compliance, and productivity. She helps organizations create better workplaces that foster growth, innovation, and success. So welcome, Katherin. Let's dive in.
Thank you, Courtney. I am so excited to be part of this conversation today. I've heard so much about this HR Acuities community and how everybody is so interactive and it's thought-provoking. And so I'd love to just jump right in. We were talking earlier about a few poll questions that would be really interesting to get input from you all. So I'd love to start with this one first. And the question is, do you track the number of complaints you receive on an annual basis? And if so, are you tracking ahead or behind of where you were last year with the number of received complaints? You can see the choices you have there. And once polling is complete, I will read to you the results of this first poll. Lexi, how's it looking? Are the polls coming in?
Yes, they're coming in. I just ended it though because we have a lot of content to get through, so I figured
Got it.
keep it moving.
Okay, here we go. 24%, so 1/4. Yes, we track complaints and the number is higher than last year, which is not surprising. 2, yes, we track complaints and the number is about the same as last year. 32% said that. 3, yes, we track complaints. The number's lower than last year, 13%. Okay, and then no, we don't track complaints annually, represents 19%, and unsure. All right, so it's not surprising to me that 24% are up, because as you'll learn in a few minutes when we dive into these slides, you're not alone if the number of complaints have been up so far this quarter. Should we do one more poll, Lexi, before we start?
Yeah, let's do it. I'll launch that right now.
Thanks to everybody for your responses so far. Okay, have you revamped your training program within the past year to help continue to prevent risk or reduce risk and strengthen your workplace culture? So yes, we completely revamped our training program. Yes, we made some updates to our existing program. No, but we're planning to revamp it soon. No, we haven't made changes. And the last is we don't currently have a training program. Would love to hear and see your responses there as well. Okay. 5% said, yes, we completely revamped our training program. 48% said, yes, we made some updates to the existing program. 24% said, no, but we're planning to revamp it. 16% said, no, we haven't made changes. And then 7% do not currently have a training program. So, very, very interesting. Let's see. Hold on 1 second. Okay. I am just trying to see. Lexi, do you see me on camera? Yeah. Okay, here we go.
Now we do. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. All right. So let's get started. Let's talk about what's happening right now. And we all know, I don't think I need to tell any of you that we're in a very disrupted time right now, especially as HR leaders. There is so much that we need to be keeping up on. I mean, I always say, as an employment lawyer, I used to read and still do read the updates on employment cases that come out every day. Now I find myself within the past few months, I've been reading the updates that are coming out multiple times a day. You almost can't keep up on the news fast enough because there has been so much development and so much evolution from a human resources, from a diversity, equity, and inclusion, from a corporate standpoint. So I know you're all, I'm impressed that you're on this call today because I know there's so much going on. And unfortunately, we need to brace ourselves because there's going to be even more going on. So complaint volume has been rising over the past few years. And many of the pundits are saying that whatever we've seen the past few years is going to increase even more exponentially. And truthfully, as one of the founders of a large employment law firm, I have shared with my team members that I think the number one thing we can do right now is ramp up and hire more employment lawyers because unfortunately our corporate clients are seeing such an increase in complaints and there's likely more on the way. So the volume has risen, it's predicted to continue. And part of the reason is we all know how active social media is right now. People get information about employment issues, executive orders, new cases on a regular basis throughout the day, not just the employment lawyers, but everybody working on your teams. They're all aware of what these updates are. And as you also know, because of social media, people have become more vocal in sharing. It all really kicked off with the Me Too era in recent history, and now it's continuing in that regard. To be a little bit more specific, between 2021 and 2024, workplace discrimination charges surged by 44%. So that's through 2024. And again, as I said, 2025 forward, the pundits are saying that they believe that there's going to be an even greater increase in complaints because of what's going on, the disruption that I mentioned earlier. To be even more specific, in the fiscal year 2024, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, received over 88,000 new workplace discrimination charges, which marked more than a 9% increase over the prior year. So that's a big jump, and that's before even the new administration and the new executive orders and the new EEOC guidance. So again, it's great that HR Acuity provides this amazing community because we all need each other more than ever before to share ideas and to find positive ways to move our organization forward. So I mentioned social discourse and potential misunderstandings. And the fact of the matter is that the current social discourse, the conversations that are going on in in the world, in our country, in the communities, and in our workplaces, they're really creating these new complexities and a potential for misunderstanding. I saw a recent study that said that over 50%, so just over 50% of our workplace is in disagreement, disagrees with the contraction of DEI in the workplace. So over 50% disagrees, and just under 50% agrees. So meanwhile, we're handling the human resources issues of a divided workplace. And in many instances, it's a stark contrast. So we have to understand we have employees with multiple different, often conflicting perspectives all coming together in our workplace right now. What we're seeing is that these, and I'm sure you're seeing it too in your workplaces, that these recent executive orders, it can unintentionally create tension between these two conflicting perspectives, right? And so one perspective may disagree with another perspective as it relates to protections of protected categories. And the next thing you know, you've got additional tension in the workplace. And so what we're seeing is that without really clear, proactive, up-to-date training of your team members, whether it's your employees, whether it's your leaders, your employees may misunderstand what's appropriate in workplace conversation. So I really believe, I mean, I'm biased because I am an employment lawyer, and one of the things we do is conduct instructor-led training to make sure we educate the workforce. I also co-founded a training company that, again, tries to educate the workforce. So I'm biased towards setting our employees and leaders up for success by educating them as to really what's appropriate in today's workplace and what's problematic and what's going to expose ourselves to risk, our teams to risk, and our entire organization to risk. So I think now more than ever, knowing that the complaints are going to continue to rise, we need to make sure we have a number of things in place. And one of those things is clear, up-to-date training that's actually effective. So another thing that we're seeing, and you may be seeing this too, is that now that some previously protected characteristics of individuals is under attack or is eroding, what it's doing is it's giving others what they believe is license to make comments about what was a protected category. For example, transgender individuals. We're hearing about more negative comments about transgender individuals because people don't think that's a protected category anymore. They don't have to use the correct pronouns, and they don't have to be as careful about their language. And when people aren't as careful about their language, one, it erodes workplace culture, and two, it exposes the organization to more risk. So again, I like to think that what we can do, what we can control as HR leaders and as leaders within our organizations is really respond to these concerns I just talked about with clear communication, which includes training on really building an inclusive culture within our organizations and a commitment to a workplace that's respectful for all. And I'm not sure if you've heard the saying, but oftentimes we have to say something at least 7 to 10 times before it sinks in for individuals. And so this is one of those things where it's not enough to just say it in the, now we are in the beginning of the second quarter and expect that people will recall it and remember it and keep it front and center. But that's one of the reasons why consistent messaging and training is really important. Return to office. So we saw that there was a surge in complaints between 2021 and 2024. And part of that was driven by the return to office. When everybody was working from home and just trying to keep themselves afloat because they had many personal issues perhaps in their families that they were dealing with, whether it was medical issues, whether it was children at home trying to study, etc. As people returned to the office in larger numbers, that is part of the reason why the complaints were increasing. So as HR leaders, we really have to keep our fingers on the pulse of what can help this transition back to either return to office, more of a hybrid approach? How can we do so? And again, part of the answers is that proactive communicating with all employees as to the standards that are acceptable in the workplace, proactive training, clear policies. So again, we're setting everyone up for success. I really believe in communicating those policies so that everybody knows what are the rules of the game, what can I do to make sure that I'm on the right side of the line as opposed to the wrong side of the line. The EEOC has been very, very busy this first quarter and a half of the year. And they've been busy doing a number of things, but one of the things they've done, which is going to potentially contribute even more to the number of complaints, is they've changed the standards about discrimination. So they basically said there no longer is something called reverse discrimination, where perhaps the minority is discriminating against the majority, and the majority, you have to have a higher standard or a higher burden of proof to prove that you as a majority member, for example, white male, is being discriminated against. So because there's no longer that higher standard under federal law, what that means is that individuals who are both in the minority and in the majority have the opportunity and perhaps the increased likelihood of making a complaint because they don't feel like it's as much of an uphill battle because the standards have been evened out. So I'm sure you all as HR leaders are familiar with Title VII, the fact that it protects all employees on certain protected bases. But when it comes to the protected bases, again, now the EEOC is interpreting it as on the basis of both majority and minority sex, both majority and minority race, both majority and minority religious belief, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the same standard will be applied to all discrimination claims, and it won't be tougher for a majority individual to bring a complaint than a minority individual. So again, what that means is when you're really communicating to your employees and when you're training your employees on preventing harassment and discrimination, for example, you want to make sure that you're focused on preventing bias, preventing retaliation across the boards, consistent enforcement. And you want to make sure you're communicating that. You know, one of the complaints of training previously was that every example was an example of a majority individual discriminating or harassing a minority individual. Now we need to make sure we're really even-handed in presenting the different examples of discrimination with respect to, regardless of whether it's a minority or majority individual who's the victim of the particular harassment or discrimination. So a new standard that we haven't had in a very long time. Retaliation, again, nothing necessarily new to you all, but it never ceases to amaze me how retaliation complaints continue to rise as one of the largest areas of complaint filed with the EEOC. So year after year, retaliation charges represent over 1/2 of all charges filed with the EEOC. And so what that means is a number of different things, that even when your managers may take what may be well-intended action as it relates to an employee, that can create potential legal risk if the situation isn't handled carefully and consistently. So if, for example, somebody claims about harassment and discrimination and there's a determination that there actually wasn't harassment or discrimination, but then the organization takes action against that individual, say for a performance issue that hasn't been documented, that hasn't been communicated, you're running the risk that that individual will go ahead and file a charge of retaliation because they'll say they made a complaint and as a result, they were terminated or demoted or reprimanded, whatever the case may be. And they're going to claim it was because they made that complaint, not because of the performance. And so that's where the burden then shifts to the employer to make sure that you have all your records in place. You have documented performance issues. You have documented coaching issues. etc. And today more than ever, employees expect action like that. And so we really, as HR leaders, we need to be on top of our game. The big words nowadays, as we know, accountability, transparency, trust in the process. And I believe the HR role now more than ever is essential and is so important, because think about it. We lead those things. HR oftentimes is the driver of transparency and communication and change management to employees. HR is oftentimes the one that's driving the trust in the process, the trust in the organization. So these are words that we really need to keep close to us as human resources leaders, because our employees and the new generations more than ever are looking for this more than ever previously. So moving on to prevention. So what can we do to really adopt this proactive mindset to really, the way I look at it is twofold. And I don't know if it's because I'm a business owner in addition to being an employment lawyer, but on the one hand, as an employment lawyer, I'm looking to help control and limit risk within my organization and all my clients' organizations. But beyond that, as a co-founder of two businesses, I'm looking to really to continue to grow and strengthen our workplace culture in addition to minimizing risk, because to me, it's really not enough to just have a minimal risk within your organization. You have to have a strong culture. You want to be the go-to place where you can attract the best talent, but more importantly, it does you no good if you can only attract the best talent. You want to be able to retain the best talent, and that's where the culture comes into play. So I view training and documentation. They're not only our first line of defense, but they're also one of the ways that we can go next level in really building our culture if we do it the right way. And I see some companies, they'll engage in preventing harassment and discrimination training to focus on minimizing legal risk, but they also, especially now more than ever, can use it as an opportunity to build empathy in your team members and to build your culture. Because if you have a really strong culture and if you have employees who are empathetic and can understand or be open to other perspectives in the workplace, well, then you're going to have fewer complaints down the road. I see it over and over again as an employment law counselor. The companies who have more complaints usually don't have as strong a culture as they really need. So you need to hunker down and do this training and have dual goals to minimize risk and to build your culture. So it's important to really understand where we are right now, right? What's the current state of your organization? And maybe that means you have to look through past and recent complaints to see what are people complaining about, what is going on. You want to take a look at your existing policies and perhaps your existing training to see how are we communicating things to our employees, and can we make improvement? One of my favorite sayings is taking whatever you're doing now next level. So let's look at our current state as HR leaders and figure out, this is what it is now. How can we go next level? How can we be even better at minimizing risk, at building culture, at being the place that everybody wants to work at? So I'm also somebody who believes in SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, et cetera. And so I think it's important that we as HR leaders keep that in mind, and that we really define specific and measurable objectives for our training programs. And again, in my mind, it's helping us minimize risk by educating our team members on what's appropriate, what's not, what they can do, what they can't do in the workplace, and also how we build these other, what used to be viewed softer skills, but now I view are essential skills, like empathy, like understanding, like perspective sharing. How can we build that into our workplace training and our processes to make sure that they're aligned with our organization's goals for a healthier and a flourishing workplace? So, as you would probably guess, prevention does in fact pay off. It does help in many instances reduce legal exposure, and if done the right way, it does help contribute to and certainly shape your workplace culture. So there are a number of things you can do, but if we're focused for the moment on really conducting training, incorporate communications that's culture shifting, that's one of the ways where you're going to hopefully get yourself into the bucket where your complaint levels are not increasing, and maybe they're even decreasing because there's a higher level of understanding and a communication within the organization. So I would encourage you all not to just check the box, but I'm sure you recognize this too. Anytime you roll out training within your organization, these individuals are on the clock. We're paying them for their time. So to me, even if you're in a state like California, New York, Connecticut, whatever it may be, that mandates that you do the training, you don't want to just do it to be checked the box. You want to do it to really advance your culture, educate your employees, build a stronger, better, healthier workplace for everybody. And the way you do that, whether you're conducting it internally on your own, whether you're bringing in an instructor from the outside, whether you're doing e-learning, is making sure that training is engaging so people pay attention to it. And now more than ever, you want to make sure you have a very trusted provider, whether it's you within your organization or whether it's, again, an instructor or or e-learning. You want to make sure that that training is up to date and compliant with all of these recent executive orders, with the EEOC guidance, because, for example, I can tell you from my training company's perspective, we had a whole list of goals we wanted to roll out in Q1, and then we got hit by executive order after guidance. And so we had to make sure that first and foremost, every single one of our trainings were scrubbed to comply with the laws and to really speak to employees in a way that they will listen. And we believe it was always done that way, but I think more now than ever, whatever you're communicating to your employees, whatever training you're rolling out to your employees, you want to make sure it's presented in a way where they're likely to listen to it, as opposed to turn it off, especially if they're in one versus the other perspective within your organization. Lexi, I'm just going to pause for a second. Are there any questions that I should address before we move forward to the next slide?
Hey, Katherin, we don't have any questions yet.
Okay.
I'll pop on if we do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. So as we were saying, training really, to me, it's prevention. It's not just process. And so it really needs to be a primary thought, not an afterthought. It really needs to be part of the solution. I think this is one of the ways where, as a community at HR Acuity, you could be sharing ideas amongst one another. What are you doing to address that? Are you engaged in, for example, a learning journey? Are you taking your team members through different levels of, whether it's communication, whether it's emotional intelligence, whether it's empathy, developing skills, in addition to perhaps like the civility and respect, to make sure the conversations are at a level that you want and expect within your organization, and that sort of thing. So I also think that the right training and the right processes in your organization can really help you as HR leaders identify patterns within the organizations. And then once you identify those patterns, then I like to say, then you go next level, right? You can then think about what action steps can we take within our organization to help shift any behaviors which we may see as a pattern. What can we do to intervene early? Because again, when we're dealing with harassment issues and discrimination issues, we know that if we can jump in early and catch something before it really grows out of control, we're going to be able to manage the situation in a much more effective way, because we'd much rather handle these issues when they're small than when they become larger, or an employee ends up going to the EEOC instead of coming to human resources to communicate. I also think it's important that when you are, for example, considering rolling out a new or even an existing training program, you want to make sure that the training program is really grounded in real life scenarios. It's nuanced. And we all know what may be relevant today, whether it relates to Muslim sentiment, you know, other types of protected religions, races, countries, depending on what wars may be going on in the world and that sort of thing. It's different than what was relevant a few years ago in, like, for example, the George Floyd era, and a few years before that with the Me Too era. So you really need to make sure that your training continues to be relevant and based on real world scenarios so that your employees are more likely to relate to it, understand it, and then apply it to what they're seeing more often than not. And again, from my perspective, it's not just what you say in the training or any communication you're having, but it's how you say it and how it's framed. And, you know, I like to say, when you sit your employees down for training, you don't want to make them feel like they're being reprimanded. You don't want to make them feel like they're a bad person because they fall into this category or that category or whatever it may be. Instead, you want people to be open to different perspectives. You want to create those aha moments so they can perhaps see how they might have been looking at things in a way that didn't serve them compared to another way that could serve them in the workplace. So I think training is more effective when it's eye-opening for employees, when it's relevant, when it's nuanced. And in those cases, your employees will pay more attention to the training, will have more takeaways, and will put what they learn in the training to work, which will again help contribute to a more positive workplace. And we all know we're not going to change everybody's perspective. I mean, I've seen enough workplaces to know there's a spectrum within the workplace, right? We've got people who are highly evolved and really have high levels of empathy and understanding, and whether it's understanding of legal principles or even understanding of the fact that we all come to the workplace with different experiences and different perspectives. And then you've got the flip side, people who are not very far in their journey to understanding others, and perhaps they have really low empathy or low EQ, no matter how high their IQ may be. And then there's those in between. But I view training as one of the ways where you can take the middle portion and move them more to the evolved side of the spectrum. And even if we can't move everybody along the spectrum, I truly believe, and I've seen it over and over again, that we can move enough people to the more advanced side of the spectrum where it can contribute positively to our workplace.
Katherin, I love that you refer to it as a journey. It makes
it is.
You know, our training really matters, right? And it can have an impact on people and where they are in their professional journey. So I love that. We do have a couple of questions related to training. So the first is wanting to hear your perspective on the increase of employees using buzzwords, if you will. And sometimes this comes up, especially after we do trainings, right? Saying things like they don't feel safe or they feel threatened, hostile work environment, harassment, discrimination. The person is saying that they get a lot of these, and it's, you know, maybe something as simple as their coworker was rude or they didn't like the way that they were spoke to, something like that. So what's kind of your take on that?
Yeah, no, you're right. That's interesting because you walk the fine line when you're rolling out the training, right? You want to educate your employees. You want to teach people what type of conduct you want to see more of in the workplace versus not. Yet you don't want to put ideas in their head about, you know, that maybe weren't there before, about thinking that, am I being harassed? Is this appropriate? Is this not? And so we try to address that in the training. So, a training might give an example that if you are a manager and you are gruff or rude or inconsiderate of your employees, but it's not because of the employee's sex or race or age, et cetera. It's a business issue for sure that you wish people would work on, and you're looking to educate your team members so that they don't engage in that type of conduct and they become a little bit more empathetic, et cetera. But that harassment doesn't necessarily apply in that context because it doesn't relate to a protected characteristic. I hear what you're saying about the psychological safety. That's a word that people are starting to use more. And I would say if people use that word more, that's a perfect opportunity for employers to really delve into a little bit more. What do they mean? What are they referring to when they feel like that might be lacking from a particular manager or department? And you might be able to identify patterns there of either maybe there is a communication issue on that particular team. Maybe there is something that is worth looking into to see, do we need to change anything? Or is this an employee who is just using words that really are not accurate?
Such a great point of really digging into your data, right? And even if you have a claim of harassment, let's say that's unsubstantiated, there still may be something there that you
Yeah,
have to address and dig into, and maybe the answer is additional training.
exactly. And to your point that you just raised, that's something that's included in the manager's training too, where the flip side is when you're not with the employees, but you're with the managers, you'd say you need to understand that if your employees think you're harassing them, even if you're treating everybody equally and you're harassing everybody, you're going to come under the magnifying glass, because the employer is going to be obligated to conduct an investigation if that buzzword is used, and they're going to have to look into the situation, and they may see that, no, you're not discriminating against anyone because of their race or their religion or their age. But yes, you're being a bad manager and you're not being fair or equitable or reasonable, and you're driving good employees away, and our retention rates are going to be impacted, and our morale and our productivity is going to be impacted. So that's a great point, which you raise as well. Like, managers need to understand that regardless of whether their behavior is legal or illegal, one of the goals is not just to minimize risk, but it's to grow your workplace culture, which isn't being done when a manager is acting like that.
Absolutely. Just because it's not harassment doesn't mean it's not negatively impacting your workplace.
Exactly, Courtney.
Yeah. Another question here we have is suggestions on balancing the desire of employees to bring their whole selves to work, while also maintaining a professional work culture, especially given, you mentioned the stat of just over 50% and just under 50%, right, of people having differing opinions of what is appropriate and reasonable.
Right. So the reference was especially with respect to over 50% in support of DEI and under 50% happy with the retraction or contraction of DEI. Yeah, it's one of those things where that's why, again, training is important to address the areas that you have to be really sensitized to. So I know back in the day, people used to refer to sensitivity training, but in part, it still is also sensitivity training. It's sensitizing employees to the fact that if you express any negativity towards diverse concepts or equitable concepts, et cetera, you're opening yourself and your organization up for attack, that someone could claim that you advocate for either discriminatory practices or inequitable practices. And someone doesn't have to be, as we know, 100% right to file a complaint. And what is likely to happen nowadays, since the EEOC is establishing that it's less likely to really take certain cases or pursue certain cases based on discrimination, based on, for example, sexual preference or transgender status or other protected categories, the courts are still going to accept those complaints. So what I think is going to happen is, if matters used to be resolved through the EEOC, what's going to happen is people are going to, when they can, go straight to the courts. And when they still have to go to the EEOC, they'll go there first, and then they'll go to the courts right after that, and will continue to make harassment and discrimination charges that way.
Thank you. One more training related question specifically for Slack. So some employees share their thoughts on changes on Slack, right? It's just another means that we have for communication in this virtual world. How would you recommend managing those Slack communications that could be disruptive to the workplace?
And by disruptive, I'm assuming they mean like the social discourse we were referring to earlier, whether you're sharing your opinions with respect to anything that could vaguely be related to protected categories and and some of the issues that are addressed in the EEOC's guidance or the executive orders. And the thinking is really social media. If your workforce or other employees are on the same platforms that you're on, you need to be aware that what you say on social media could be considered harassing or discriminatory. And there are cases out there that absolutely stand for that proposition, that if you say something that could be considered harassing or discriminatory, even if it's outside of work hours, even if you're not necessarily referencing your employer, but if your colleagues or those who report to you are on that social media platform with you, then that can be brought in as evidence of harassing or discriminatory conduct. So that's something that should be built into, if it's not already, your social media handbook policies, your various communication policies, your harassment and discrimination policies, because it's a great question. And I would bet you that most of your employees would not think that that's a concern, because they view that as their personal life, their freedom of speech, which if nobody from the workplace ever found out about it, they're in better shape. But if people are actually on platforms with them, then that's when it becomes, people who they work with are on platforms with them, that's when it's problematic, and definitely something that you do not want to have going on under your watch. So something you'd want to communicate policies around, train around. And that's one of the things that we always bring up in training, the social media aspect of harassment and discrimination and how employees need to be very aware of it. So that's a great question. Thanks for sharing that, Courtney.
Great example of definitely something you want to include in your trainings.
Exactly. And your handbook policies. So both. And speaking of handbook policies, that's something that, again, your organization should be going through now in the wake of these recent changes, to really make sure they still comply with the law and they still accomplish what you're looking to accomplish as HR leaders and organizations. Documentation, I know Courtney agrees with me 5,000% here, but documentation, whether it's your employee handbook or the actions that you're taking within your organization, from whether it's a complaint perspective or otherwise, they are incredibly important now more than ever. Because again, if we're operating under the assumption that, within the past 4 years, the number of complaints have risen 44%, and this year the number of complaints is likely going to increase even more, we want to make sure we're doing the right thing as organizations, and we're documenting every time we are doing the right thing, whether it's we're receiving a complaint appropriately, we are communicating with the person who's complaining appropriately, we're investigating appropriately. We really want to make sure now more than ever we can actually prove that we are doing the right things as an organization. So it's not enough for us to just be able to stand up and say with a straight face, absolutely, we acted fairly, we acted appropriately, we acted timely. We need to have clear and legally sound records showing that we did just that each and every time, so that we're able to defend the increase in complaints that will likely come the way of many of us. And again, every time I say that, I want to say, and so that's why we have to build our culture that much more quickly and essentially, because we want to combat that increase of complaints with an increasingly positive and productive and flourishing culture to combat that increased risk. So it's important, as you'd imagine, to support our frontline managers. I again believe training of our frontline managers is so essential, because they're responsible for making sure that, in the case of harassment and discrimination, that we have a harassment and discrimination-free workplace. And so the only way they can really effectively do that is if we set them up for success by understanding what in fact are their responsibilities, what in fact do they have to do if they witness or hear about any inappropriate conduct today, which might include the social media platforms we were talking about, which might include discussion of politics and recent executive orders and a belief in favor or against them, et cetera. There's a lot that's changed. And so we need to make sure our managers understand where they should be coming out or what they should be doing when they overhear those conversations and when they see employees who may be upset as a result of those conversations. So, they're the ones who are really, they're making real-time decisions, and we want to make sure they're making real-time decisions with the education from HR and with the blessing from HR and support from HR. And so we want to make sure they know they've got to loop in HR, which is another one of the factors that we, of course, would include in our training, not only educating them on this disruption and evolution, but also our role in truly being a resource to these managers to make sure that they're effectively handling every important function of their job. So we need to educate them. We need to empower them. We need to clearly communicate with them. We need to say it 7 to 10 times at least to make sure that it gets through. And again, they can have the highest IQ of anyone we know, and they probably still need to hear it 7 to 10 times because they have a lot going on in their plates that doesn't relate to human resources and issues related to this. So we really need to make sure that we're doing all those things, and then we're documenting the fact that we're doing all those things when we communicate with our managers, when we train our managers. Again, we want to have strong documentation practices in place. And that's what I love about HR Acuity, and that's what I preach to all of my employment law clients, because I always believe if you're doing the right things, if your leaders are taking the right steps, give yourself credit by documenting the fact that you're doing the right things and taking the right steps. Because again, it's not enough to just do them. You really need to make sure you're documenting the fact that you're doing them.
Great. Katherin, quick question on documentation. Sure. You mentioned legally sound records. What do you consider legally sound records when it comes to documentation?
So that's a really good question. So legally sound records are, there are a lot of best practices in records, right? It's everything from who was part of the conversation, if it was a coaching session of perhaps an employee or a manager. When was the conversation? I mean, it never ceases to amaze me. We'll handle a litigation matter defending an organization, and you'll look at the notes of human resources. And again, HR people now more than ever have so much on their plate. So it's hard to keep up with this, but they don't have a set process for how they always include the date and where the meeting took place and who was at the meeting and what was the follow-up after the meeting. And so you want to make sure you have, in an ideal world, templates that you're following, even if it's your own internal template, preferably vetted by like another HR leader or employment law counsel. But you want to make sure you have all this important information and it's really handled consistently each and every time, because if you have documentation that's handled one way one time and another way another time, that can be a potential problem for you because it's not consistent. And whenever there's not consistency, that opens the door to someone saying that it's either improper or it's discriminatory because one person was held to these standards, another was held to another. So making sure that your records are consistent and detail-oriented and contain all the important information that you really need to have to be able to establish that you took appropriate action. Because oftentimes the action you take can be a legal defense if someone claims that there was improper conduct going on, whether it's harassment or discrimination. So then the burden shifts back to you as the organization to be able to show that you did the right thing. So great question again, Courtney. Thank you.
Yeah. I always say document or it didn't happen.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Right?
I have to give quick plug for HR Acuity, because this is what our platform helps employee relations professionals and frontline managers with our manager platform be able to do really well. You said consistency several different times, Katherin, and that consistency is so key, both in how you are documenting, where you're storing that documentation, and HR Acuity can help you to do that. So quick plug.
You're exactly right. And you know what, you deserve to do it the right way as HR leaders, as organizations. And again, I can tell you in the employment law context, I can't tell you how many times the well-meaning HR leader or manager will come in and they they've been working, 3 different jobs and they haven't had time to keep the accurate information and documentation they needed, and they don't have the templates in place. And so they come in kind of empty handed. And then there's the employee who has notes and notes and notes and documentation and records and recordings and all sorts of things trying to prove their side of the equation. And the manager, who was so well intended, so focused on their job, doesn't have it in place. And then you have a jury who most juries tend to be pro-employee to begin with. They need to be shown, it needs to be proven to them that this is a good corporate citizen doing all the right things, documenting, taking action. And if the organization and its leaders can't do that, they're much more likely to side with the employee with their handwritten notes and whatever else it is that they come to court with. So great point, Courtney. And I completely agree. I love the way HR Acuity helps set employers up for success by making sure there's the consistency needed. So as we mentioned earlier, complaints, like, this is an opportunity to go next level. This is an opportunity to have a growth mindset. I like to say high performing teams and high performing individuals crave or should crave feedback. So you can take that feedback and then go next level. So if we receive complaints, whether they're formal, whether they're informal, whether they're legitimate, whether they're unproven, we can always learn from those complaints, and we can figure out how we can strengthen our culture by addressing issues that are raised in the complaints, if any are proven to be valid. So again, we talked about patterns and how patterns might reveal gaps, right? So it might reveal those opportunities for us to strengthen our workplace culture. It's also the way that we can identify patterns and systemic issues, and perhaps it's performance issues of a manager. If you continue to have employees complain, even if there's nothing perhaps illegal about what they're complaining about related to a manager, again, it may address a performance issue, and that still needs to be addressed. If it's a management style that is driving employees away, a management style that's causing employees to be absent from work more often than others, a management style that's causing employees to complain more. So again, we should really gain these insights from any complaints we receive and look to see what gaps are identified through that. And then as a result, once we see the gaps, that's when we step in and we proactively implement solutions, whether it's putting additional helpful policies in place and communicating those policies across the board, whether it's really bringing in additional training programs that, again, one of my personal commitments is to making sure all of the training that I do, either from an instructor-led or e-learning perspective, it really incorporates the concept of empathy into the training, because I believe, I know studies show that you absolutely can improve an individual's empathy. There are also studies that show that only 10% of individuals are naturally born empathetic, and the rest of us either learn it or don't throughout the course of our lifetime. But it's definitely a skill that can be developed, and people can become more empathetic. And that, as you can imagine, that does nothing but help the workplace. If we have more employees in the workplace who are more empathetic than they were yesterday, that's only a good thing. So I always like to pepper that into any type of training, even if it's compliance training. Let's teach people what they need to do to comply while they're becoming better team members, better leaders, etc. And again, addressing these complaints can enhance trust and transparency, two things that we as HR leaders are often looked to from the employees who work with our organizations. They want to know they can trust us and the organization. They want to know that the organization is being open, honest, and as transparent as possible with them. And if you're talking about the complaint process, well, then it's just a question of whoever's bringing the complaint to you, you want to make sure that the communication continues, because again, when I've seen some employment litigation that hasn't gone the way a company has wanted it, oftentimes it's because the complaining employee is upset that the company never got back to them and never communicated that they handled the situation. And even though you're walking a fine line, you can't necessarily give the details about somebody's performance that might have been meted onto somebody who violated a policy, you can still circle back and communicate in a timely and effective way. And if you don't, know that that employee is going to think you did nothing, and they're likely to want to lash out, and that's going to cause a complaint and something that you could otherwise avoid. Also, by being open and responsive when complaints are brought to your attention on the front end, by having policies that say you are, on the front end by having training that says you are, and then when you're in the moment with somebody who's bringing the complaints, if you do that, that's going to help employees think this is a culture that really cares about employees who are having issues, who have concerns. This is a culture that has a growth mindset, that wants to know if there are ways that we can do things better. And in doing that and having that open communication, again, that's one of the ways your leaders within your organizations can build that trust, build the credibility with the employees, and really build the resilience that will effectively work for your organization. So we're almost through. Just a few last thoughts. Again, we talked about starting with your current state, really doing an analysis of where we are right now. Do we have any patterns? Where do we want to go? Where do we think our weaknesses are? And so we want to define our objectives there, whether it's minimizing the potential legal risk that we think is headed our way and increasing numbers, whether it's building our culture to the next level, taking where we are right now, taking the divisiveness of the workplace and figuring out what are our objectives for moving forward? How can we bring our team members forward along these lines? And then educating and empowering your leaders and employees within the organizations with the right tools, whether it's the right policies, the right processes, the right training, so that you can have the best possible workplace. So I wish you all the best of success in accomplishing these really noble objectives. I think right now in the workplace, there's no more important position than a human resources leader who's committed to the betterment of their organizations. And I commend HR Acuity, Courtney and Lexi, and all of your leaders and employees for really the mission that you're helping these organizations accomplish. So thank you so much for involving me in this conversation.
Well, Katherin, we appreciate you being here. This was fantastic information and so timely and relevant to, I think, what we're all experiencing right now. And so really appreciate your time. Kathy has put a couple of resources in the chat. You can follow Shift HR compliance training on LinkedIn for lots more resources and information. She also put Katherin's email. So if you had some questions that we weren't able to get to today, feel free to reach out.
Yes.
And if anything that you learned today about HR Acuity is interesting to you, or you'd just like to learn more, we'd be more than happy to schedule a curiosity tour. And there's a link in the chat for that as well. So thank you so much, Katherin. And thank you everyone for being here. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye.